when you are no longer clear-headed about what you hold sacred, the Ummah, a nation, a tribe, starts unraveling. Sociologically, the bonds start breaking and evaporating. There will come a time, the Prophet ﷺ is talking about the future, where for a Muslim to be the distance of 1 meter from the Al-Aqsa mosque will be worth more than the entire earth can offer. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. والحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه، فإنه حقا من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا رحمن يا رحيم، اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا معاشنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا. اللهم يا رب العالمين واصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر يا الله. As we approach this coming Ramadan, as I've said before on more than one occasion, a person's life can be measured by the number of Ramadans they've lived through. And each Ramadan is a signpost. And each Ramadan is a station in one's life to check fully where they are, where they were, where they are, and what they foresee for themselves in the future. Each Ramadan is a pause. You are affirmatively demanded to take time not just to fast and not just to pray Taraweeh, but the fasting and the Taraweeh and the intensifying of ibadah and the reading of Quran are all tools for the necessary pause in one's life to reflect upon where you were, where you are, and where you're going. Well, this coming Ramadan is important because this is the Ramadan right after now the genocide in Gaza. Furthermore, I suspect that this coming Ramadan is not just important because of where Muslims are at, but it is important because of what I suspect the Israelis are going to do vis-a-vis the Al-Aqsa Mosque specifically, and vis-a-vis Al-Quds more generally, Jerusalem. And as I have said many times, everything that Allah allows to unfold in our lives is a lesson. It must be approached as a lesson, as an instruction from your Lord, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same with this Ramadan and the challenges that all of us Muslims will confront vis-a-vis Masjid Al-Aqsa, the Aqsa Mosque, and Al-Quds, Jerusalem more generally. First, I want to underscore a very important idea that is perhaps so obvious that we often overlook and forget. I've spoken in the past about the Muslim Ummah and what a Muslim Ummah is. And on many khutbahs, I've underscored that your accountability and my accountability in the hereafter will not simply be about what you've done with your personal life or about how you've handled your own personal body, your physiological existence. But the taklif, the obligation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the obligation of khilafah, of being Allah's caliphs on earth, necessarily means that part of your accountability, and a significant part of your accountability and my accountability, is what you have done for the Ummah, for the Muslim Ummah at large. Again, to state the obvious, and it should be obvious, that if your Ummah is suffering, the fact that you exist in ease and comfort will not count for you, it will count against you. The idea that you exist in comfort as your Ummah suffers is diametrically opposed to everything that the Prophet ﷺ taught. And if you understand the Quran at all, again, it is diametrically, unequivocally opposed to the entire message of the Quran. You are but an extension of your Ummah. You fall with your ummah and you rise with your ummah. When you think of your rights and your duties, it is immoral error to think of your rights and your duties individually. You must think of your rights and your duties in the context of the entire Muslim Ummah. Your rights and your duties are contingent upon the place and the status and your relation to the Ummah. The idea that I want to underscore, though, is that every ummah that rose in history, every ummah that existed in human sociology, had a gravitational pull that pulls the ummah together, a common bond. In ummahs that are morally misguided, that gravitational pull could be an ancestral history that they sanctify and effectively worship. The reason idols in pre-modernity was a common sociological and anthropological reality of all human beings, all human societies would end up creating idols of sorts, of one sort or another, is that idol offered or helped construct or was part of the construction of what is rendered sacred, the idea of sacredness. The sacred inspires the imagination of the ummah. The sacred creates the bonds that tie an ummah together. The sacred is like the glue that makes an ummah an ummah. So in the days of ignorance, yes, the sacred were idols, but they were necessary for a people to think of themselves as a people. That is what captured their imagination, their loyalty. That is what made them feel they have something that bonds them together. Every ummah that ever existed in history has had its sacred representation, if you will, its idols. Whatever that sacredness is, but it is always there. Now for the Muslim Ummah, of course, we think of the Quran and we think of, and this is important, not just the Quran, because the Quran is a text and a message. It is not a banner. It is not a space. The Quran is sacred or represents the sacred in the same way, perhaps, that for other nations and other the text of a constitution can represent what is sacred. But because it is an intellectual artifact, because it is something intellectual, by itself, it does not offer the glue that holds an ummah together. It represents the methodology for the ummah. It represents the moral path of the ummah. But that sense of bond, the same thing with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. In principle, all of the Muslim ummah owes its loyalty and fidelity to the sunnah of the Prophet, or it should. And those who attempt to deconstruct the role of the Prophet in the Islam ﷺ don't realize the extent to which they deconstruct Islam itself and render Islam itself inoperative. Because I will go a step further and tell you that the Quran itself loses so much of its meaning without the accompanying legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. The sacred space in Islam is obvious. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the fairest home, by that meaning the fairest mosque, إن أول بيت وضع للناس, the first abode that Allah blessed and created for humanity on earth is in Mecca, i.e. Mecca, the holy site in Mecca. That is our sacred space. But Allah and the Prophet ﷺ doesn't just say that it is the house in Mecca, but arm in arm with it is the first qibla of Muslims. What Allah consistently refers to in the Quran as the space that Allah has made blessed, Al-Ard al-Mubarakah. When Allah talks about the Prophet Lut, and Allah tells the Prophet Lut to seek refuge, and Allah tells the Prophet Lut, seek refuge in Al-Ard al-Mubarakah, the blessed land in Palestine. When Allah gives the Prophet Ibrahim refuge from oppression, where does Allah instruct the Prophet Ibrahim to go? Again, Al-Ard al-Mubarakah in Palestine. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ rises to the heavens, there is a very important symbolic act. The first house is the one in Mecca. But the second house that Allah created as the center of monotheism is Quds al-Sharif, Jerusalem. And Al-Ard al-Mubarakah is the land of Jerusalem. And the Prophet ﷺ in the Isra and Mi'raj is reported to have led all the previous prophets in prayer. Where? In the land of Jerusalem, in the Al-Aqsa mosque. Why is that? Well, even more, there are traditions that say that the place in the hereafter where humanity will begin its journey of accountability in the hereafter will be in the territory of, again, Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis, the holy site, or the holy sites in plural, in Bayt al-Maqdis. Indeed, one can add so much more. When again, just for the sake of conclusion, because just remember this, that when Allah empowers the Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, and gives the Prophet sovereignty over wind, the plane or the groundwork where all of that happens, again, is referred to in the Quran as al-ardu allati barakna fiha, the blessed land, the land of Jerusalem. An important point is that when the Prophet ﷺ in the Isra and Mi'raj is reported to lead all previous prophets in prayer in Jerusalem, think about this. The Isra and Mi'raj could have completely omitted Jerusalem. At the time that the Isra and Mi'raj happens, Muslims pray towards Jerusalem. That's a direction in prayer, a qibla al-ula. But Allah knows that this is not going to be the final qibla in prayer. And Allah, if Jerusalem was not very significant, Allah could have omitted Jerusalem from the entire Isra and Mi'raj. But that's not what happens. And the theological reasons why that does not happen is critical. Because symbolically, our holy land is the holy land of Ibrahim alayhi salam, is the holy land of Lut alayhi salam, is the holy land of Sulaiman. It is that holy land, the holy land of monotheism and tawheed. And symbolically, why the Prophet ﷺ leads all previous prophets in prayer and in Jerusalem is to say, here is this new phase in tawheed. And the two blessed houses, the two centers in this life and after, the two spaces that Allah has created as the center of Tawheed, center of monotheism, is the one in Mecca and the one in Al-Quds. And that is precisely why there is a there's a whole number of ahadith, but I'll just, in interest of time, choose some of them. A hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says, when asked whether prayer in the mosque in Medina is worth more or the prayer in the Al-Aqsa mosque is worth more. And the Prophet ﷺ responds by saying, yes, at our time, prayer in the Medina mosque counts more, for more. However, there will come a time, the Prophet ﷺ is talking about the future, where for a Muslim to be the distance of 1 meter from the Al-Aqsa mosque will be worth, for a real Muslim, more than the entire earth can offer. In other words, there will come a time where the Al-Aqsa mosque will be of such significance for a true Muslim that it is important more than what the entire earth can offer, more important than what life can offer. Another hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says that there is a group in my ummah, طائفة من أمتي, a sect or a small part of my ummah that will remain holding on to the truth. Those who disagree with them or those who betray them, it is on those who betray and on those who disagree, not this group of people. And when the Prophet ﷺ is asked, who are they? He said, it will be those who are defending Jerusalem. That the defenders of Jerusalem are on the right path, are on the path of truth, and that all Muslims who betray them or let them down, they're the losers. They're the ones at a loss, not those who adhere and stand by the sacred space of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, like Mecca, is a universal center for monotheism, for Tawheed. And when the Prophet ﷺ led all previous prophets in prayer, it is like an official proclamation of surrendering the flags of monotheism, surrendering the flag of monotheism from previous prophets to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And this is precisely why that the Sunnah is replete with Sahaba that would tell the Prophet ﷺ during his lifetime, my dream is to pray in Al-Aqsa mosque before Masjid Umar was built. Replete. The Prophet is alive and living in Medina or Mecca, and there are numerous Sahaba during his lifetime. They are asking him, should we leave you and journey to Jerusalem? And this is why as well, that upon the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba understood what job they must discharge. They understood automatically what they must do next. And what they must do next is liberate Jerusalem from the Byzantines and put it in the hands of the inheritors of Tawheed on earth. Indeed, Islam itself and the Khilafah among Muslims ceases to mean anything without Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, by the way, in Islamic texts, is not Al-Masjid Al-Umari. It is not just the mosque that you see in pictures, the Aqsa Mosque. The blessed land, the sacred space, is this entire compound, including Ha'it al-Buraq, or what Jews call the Wailing Wall. And I'll tell you this before I finish my first khutbah. If you look in the Jewish tradition, pre-modern tradition, for any semblance that what Jews today call the Wailing Wall was sacred or considered sacred in the Jewish tradition, pre-modern age, pre-colonialism, you will look in vain. Because in fact, the sacredness of that wall is something that modern Jews took from Muslims, not that it was, in fact, it was entirely absent in their tradition. And in fact, you find numerous responsa, pre-modernity, pre-colonialism, for reasons that have to do with purity in the Jewish tradition, that Jews are told not to visit that site at all, that Muslims consider sacred and consider to be the inheritance of the prophets of Tawheed from Ibrahim onwards. The natural place of Jerusalem and the Islamic Tawheed would not make sense without Al-Quds, was so innate and intuitive to the Sahaba that the liberation of Jerusalem from Byzantine hands was a no-brainer. In the same way that the Sahaba understood that they have Arab brethren in Sham and Arab brethren in Egypt, and that these people are living under occupation. But the record is clear, even more than liberating their brethren. It was a no-brainer that we must liberate Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is the center of Tawheed, or the twin center of Tawheed. Without it, the passing of Khilafah to Muslims, to become Allah's viceroys on earth, to witness, to act as witnesses upon humanity, would not make any sense. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم أسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وآله وأصحابه يا رب العالمين. We all forget that the genocide in Gaza started because the Palestinians, and not Hamas, but Palestinians in Gaza, launched Tufan Al-Aqsa. The operation was called the Flood of Aqsa, or the Deluge of Aqsa, meaning for the sake of Aqsa. And we all forget, because Muslims have very bad short memories, that all of this goes back to 2022, when Israelis who have made a habit of invading the Aqsa Mosque in Ramadan and brutalizing worshippers in the Aqsa Mosque in 2022 was a major and unprecedented invasion of the Aqsa Mosque by Israeli religious fanatics, where they beat worshippers in the Aqsa Mosque and violated the sanctity and damaged the Aqsa Mosque. After which Israel, emboldened by Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, Israel dared to do something that it had not done before. And that is to divide temporally, time-wise, to give Jews the right to be at the Aqsa Mosque and worship at the Aqsa Mosque from sunrise till noon. And for Israel to publicly say that what they plan to do with the Aqsa Mosque is what they did with Masjid al-Ibrahimi in Khalil, where they gave Jews 60% of the mosque and Muslims 40%. And that is exactly what they want to do. And Trump comes out on record and says, oh, this whole Aqsa Mosque, it should be an international place for worship. That doesn't mean that I'm going to allow Muslims to pray in Christian churches or I'm going to allow Muslims to pray in Jewish spaces, it means that Jews and Christians can pray in Muslim spaces, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And what I anticipate this Ramadan is repeated violations, egregious violations. We live in an age in which we all heard MBS say unabashedly, without shame, Jerusalem is not my problem. القدس مش قضيتي. Jerusalem is not my problem. We all watched as Israel launched a genocide, a full genocide. 2 billion Muslims couldn't even let a water tank into Gaza. We all watched as Israel launched a genocide. Jordan did not even interrupt the flow of products and goods into Israel. Saudi Arabia didn't even tell Israeli planes that you can't fly over our space, leave alone cancel Mariah Carey or Nicki Minaj or whatever. Of course, by the way, when the King of Kuwait died, or when the Emir of Kuwait died, they canceled their parties. But when people are being butchered in Jerusalem, they cancel nothing. We all watched when not a single Arab country or Muslim country, including Turkey, Egypt, Morocco, recalled its ambassador or in any way imposed sanctions against Israel. Israel committed a genocide and got the message very clear. This Ummah has let go of its sanctities and what is sacred to it. And I'll tell you, when you let go of what is sacred, when you are no longer clear-headed about what you hold sacred, the Ummah, a nation, a tribe, starts unraveling. Sociologically, the bonds start breaking and evaporating. That is the asabiyya, what Ibn Khaldun used to call the asabiyya. If you will, that secret energy that holds a people together. That asabiyya, that secret energy that bonds a people together, is what you hold as sacred symbolically, spatially, in your mind and heart and soul. You want to understand why Muslims defended Jerusalem time and again and again and again and sacrificed millions of lives before Salah ad-Din, after Salah ad-Din, during Salah ad-Din, until the modern age? It's because Muslims were clear-headed about what symbolized Tawheed and what symbolized the life of Tawheed in this Ummah and what symbolized this Ummah itself. And that if they compromised on that, the Ummah falls apart. There is no more Ummah. So when you hear a hypocrite, a munafiq, like the king of Saudi says, Jerusalem is not my problem. When you see other hypocrites and the leaders of Jordan and Egypt try to convince you, Jerusalem is just another mosque, or even the offensive statement that it is the third holy site in Islam. Nonsense. Jerusalem is not the third holy site in Islam. It is among the holiest sites, two sites in Islam, Mecca and Jerusalem. The centers of Tawheed. The place where our prophet led other prophets in prayer. How could you get more? The place where our prophet told us that to be 1 meter away from that mosque in Al-Aqsa will be more important for you than what this entire earth offers. Your life from the time of birth to the time of death. We are going to see repeated abuses and violations of the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque. Already, since the ceasefire in Gaza, Israel has already, after the ceasefire, murdered 230 Palestinians. And no one cares. The only Israeli who was killed by Israel itself because it mistook the Israeli, since the ceasefire, for a Palestinian. If these violations that take place teach us to disassociate, to forget, or to ignore, or to somehow whitewash, or somehow gaslight, or somehow deconstruct the importance of what Jerusalem represents for Islam and for Muslims, then that's the true defeat. Your ibadah this Ramadan must include the reconstruction of the meaning of the sacred and muqaddas and mubarak in our lives. Because without it, the Muslim Ummah is truly just a mirage. An Ummah that doesn't remember what is sacred for it and in it is not an Ummah at all. Allahumma ighfir lana, Allahumma afu anna, Allahumma arhamna ya Rahman ya Ali ya Azim. Allahumma hadina li aqraba min hadha rashada ya Rabb. Allah, forgive our sins. Inspire us to be better Muslims. Inspire us to recall the truth of your Tawheed, to recall the true place of what you've made sacred and what you've made the glue and bond for our Ummah. To remember that, to internalize that, to teach that to our children. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. أسأل الله يستجب لكم وأقم الصلاة.